Servus and welcome to another episode of Servus Crowd, Germany for non-Germans. And well, first of all, glad you're here again. I'm feeling much better than last time I recorded, so I hope you can hear it in my voice as well, less coughing and so on. But today, the Servus Crowd episode is a little bit of a somber one. Why? Because today's January 28th, while I'm recording 2022, which means it's one day after the Holocaust Memorial Day. And I figured that this is an important day, obviously. And so this led me to change my plans a little bit and, just talk about how the Second World War and so on is being talked about, perceived and so on in Germany. Because I think, and I saw that now also from latest examples in the news, that apparently the German way of handling this is a bit surprising to some. Why do I say that? Because a week ago or so, the news showed that I think a Dutch tourist who went to Auschwitz did the Hitler salute, the Nazi salute in front of the Auschwitz sign, the concentration camp, right? And so she got arrested, I think, and then fined probably. I'm not sure what happened after. But in Germany, everybody knows that you can't do that. But also my friends living abroad, they said but it's just a joke, so why? So I think maybe there's just some talking to be done, maybe a little bit necessary to just explain what's happening there. So I don't want to make this a World War II podcast. There are enough of those podcasts out there that do a great job, like history podcasts and so on. And to be quite honest, as a German, I heard about this more than enough. The thing is, in Germany, when you grow up in Germany and you go to school like most kids do, you will hear about World War II all the time. Of course, in history class, but also other classes will refer to it all the time. But history classes, I would say, from 9th grade onwards or so, 9th grade, 9th grade onwards, I think, are mainly focusing on the Second World War. I remember distinctly when I was in school, in high school, primary school too, high school, I liked history classes when you learn about the Romans and all of this stuff, and you're like, oh my God, it's so exciting, that's so cool. And then 9th grade comes around, it's like, okay, let's talk about our past and let's talk about it all the time. And the thing is, I say that now a bit I know, I don't mean to be disrespectful, right? But it's just as a kid, you're like, all right, we talked about the Second World War now. We understand it's terrible. We should not have, this should not have happened. We should not have done that, but can we move on, please? But of course we can't, because it's just such a terrible thing that happened, and it's important that people understand. And now, retrospectively, as a grown-up, I can say, okay, I understand why schools emphasize that so much. As a kid, you say, okay, I had it in 9th grade, why do I have to talk about it in 10th grade again? As a grown-up, you're like, yeah, that makes sense, because there are so many layers to it, there's so much information to it, so much happened, it's impossible to process as a kid, within one school year, for example. And so it does make sense to some extent. Now, do I think that you have to talk about it for 2 or 3 years straight in school? Maybe not. Maybe yes, but maybe also talk about something else as well, just to keep the students interested and don't make the students go, ugh. Because I can unfortunately also see the other side, where then people would say, that wasn't me, that's not my generation, it's been 2 or 3 generations before me as we move on in time. And they say, okay, I get it, but now it's enough. Stop blaming me for what happened 2 generations ago, for example. So I'm not saying this is the case. I'm saying I can see how people would say it. Okay, but now back to how do we talk about it? So again, as a kid in Germany, 9th, when I was in school, it was 9th grade, 10th grade, and then if you keep going to school, 11th, 12th, and so on. Then also in German language class, you might read something that's been written in that time or during that time, before, after, of course. You discuss all the things you discuss Anne Frank, you discuss Sophie Scholl, for example, and her brother the guys who were running the White Rose, Weiße Rose, the trying to, I know, educate people about what Nazism was. So we learn a lot about like the things also surrounding the war, like what happened that was leading up to the war, like how was it possible, for example, that Hitler came to power and so on. So we don't just learn about like, hey, yo, we sucked. It's more like, how did it happen? Like, how was this possible? Why did the people follow this guy? Because it's not like all the Germans were stupid back then, right? It was like one of the, as always, because hey, come on, we're awesome. It was one of the most like flourishing economies even back then. And then like, how can they follow this guy, right? So we talk about this in classes. You talk about then the war itself, of course, how it unfolded. Surprisingly, though, you don't talk much about how the Germans actually had success. You talk about like Blitzkrieg and so on, like how Germany took Poland and so on. But you just like in a sense of like, and then Germany took Poland in the Blitzkrieg, and then you move on. So more time is spent on explaining like why it was bad, rather than also explaining how it actually happened. And of course, again, it makes sense for kids if you don't want to say it was a pretty smart strategy by Hitler and the army, like what they did. Because if you would say that, the kids would be like, yeah, cool, and you don't want the kids to react like this. So I understand that. I'm just explaining that you don't really look at like how the war was being fought, rather than just the outcome of the war. So then Germany took Poland, Germany took this, and then this happened, and then eventually they got stuck in Russia, and then Russia fought back and so on. So you're not getting into that much detail, which is also fair because, well, you're children. Okay, so it makes sense. Okay. So once you have exams on that, of course, and so on. You also learn, but I'm not sure if it's actually in history classes, if it's then like you have politics classes too, like politics classes where you talk about this, of course, where you talk about like how to talk about the topic. You have German language classes where you again read literature based on that era that was written during the era. When you talk about science and so on, you also talk about like scientists who flew Germany back in that time and so on, of course. So basically everything you discuss in school is somewhat related to the Second World War, just because it has so much impact, of course. So that's that. Then you learn how to talk about it. But it's not an actual class. It's more like what I said, like several classes connect to the topic. So then you eventually figure out that I don't think any one of my friends ever tried, but it's just implicit. It's implied that you would never do the Nazi salute, of course. Yeah, why would you do that? But somehow on the go you learn that it's actually also prohibited by law. So if you do the Nazi salute in Germany, for example, you will go to prison. And then you probably have to pay a fine or something. But you will first go to prison. The police will get you. Also, if you say something, if you say the Nazi salute and so on, for example, which is now interesting for like if you have a more open mind for just a second. I'm not saying you should be allowed, but like freedom of speech and so on is so important. But then you're not allowed to say those things. But then, of course, those are terrible things, and no one should ever say that again. So makes sense. Here, what I also find interesting, by the way. So Germany doesn't ban books or stuff like this. Well, they did back then ban, I mean, not back then, oh my God, not during the Second World War. That's when they burned books, I know. I mean like 20 years ago or so, like Germany banned lots of music that was supposedly like right-wing, but even if it wasn't, like for example, one of my favorite German bands called Die Ärzte had a few, it's like a punk rock band, and they had like some harsh sounding songs using some choice words, but actually it wasn't right-wing. Not at all. It's actually way more left-wing. But the words were just very choice, like very, so very adult. So that's why they got banned, for example, and other bands too. So, but usually it's not easy to get like really like a book banned or so in Germany. So hence it's actually quite interesting to see that saying things or like hand gestures are banned, for example. Again, I'm not criticizing it. I'm just showing the contradiction, but totally fine. Like, I'm all for banning those two words, for example. All for it. Why would someone feel the need to say that? So all for it. Okay. Where was I now? I lost track. Okay, yeah. So you're not allowed to say it. You're not allowed to do that sign. Makes sense, right? Yes. So now the thing is also what is interesting here is like no one in Germany. I mean, no one of their right mind in Germany. So the AfD party members excluded. No one in their right mind in Germany would ever want to see, for example, a movie where the Germans win the Second World War. You know, like very often, like the party, like the Americans always showcase like how awesome the American military is, right? The British would showcase like how awesome the British military is and how well they did in the Second World War and like how they actually won. The Russians would do the same. The Germans would never want to see a movie where the German military wins. Like, you're like, what? No. We know we are the bad guys back then. We were the bad guys. We know that. We don't think we were misunderstood or anything. We know this was bad. This should never have happened. And we are very much aware that this should never happen again. So yeah, that's just something that I think is very important to also stress. Also, there's this saying in Germany, like when we remember like things like the Holocaust and so on. So if you say the Holocaust didn't happen, by the way, you can also I don't know if you get fined or jail time. I'm not sure, but if you are a Holocaust in Holocaust denial, definitely something's going to happen. I'm not sure right now if it's jail time or just a fine, but something's going to happen because the Holocaust, of course, was very real. Okay. There's also like memorials everywhere. Like one impressive memorial, the biggest Holocaust memorial is in Berlin, in Germany, very close to the famous Brandenburg Gate. And it's like, but just Google Holocaust memorial. You will see it's like a labyrinth, like of like concrete blocks that symbolize like more or less like how lost you are in, or how lost they were back then. And I think also symbolizes, I don't know, the screaming, I don't know how to say it in English, like the screaming quietness, the loud quietness of, like, I think helplessness. I would think like when I'm there, I feel incredibly sad, and you just want to scream, but you can't. Like that's at least the feeling that I have when I'm at the Holocaust Memorial. The thing is, it's like a labyrinth, so you can walk around between those concrete blocks. And lots of people go around there. They do yoga poses, jump on top of it, take pictures, and so on. You will also get fined for this by now. So you're not allowed to. Maybe you have to go to the police station first. So you're also not allowed to do this. And it makes sense. Don't jump on a memorial, obviously. Right? So just saying, if you're ever in Berlin, don't jump on it or do anything stupid there. Okay. Again, like it makes me really sad when I'm there. But maybe also just happens because you're so aware of what happened back then. All right. Now I lost a bit of my train of thought because I got a bit sad right now thinking of that about that. But let me get back on track. So you learn about history, the war, and so on. You watch lots of movies about like how concentration camps looked like, what happened there. So we are very aware of that. Very shocked, like when you see the first, like I think like the 9th or 10th grade, when you watch those documentaries and the footage, and you see like, oh, that really happened. We all had to watch Schindler's List like more than once, I believe, during my time in school, which also made most of us cry at some point. So you're very aware of what happened back then. If you're not aware of that, I don't know, you must be like, I don't know, just completely ignorant. Okay. Yeah, now the thing with why are there still so many right-wing people in Germany? And first of all, it's not that many. So you sometimes make it sound like it's like millions of people. It's not that many. But of course, it's a loud minority, obviously. Why are they so there? Like, there are right-wing people everywhere, right? Why are they there? Because they're not happy. They're unhappy with like promises that haven't been kept, for example. They're unhappy because they don't have the job that they wanted. Maybe they don't have a job. Maybe they're just not in a good place right now. And then it's easy to blame people that are different than you, right? So, and then just blame like foreigners and so on. I'm not going to go down that road right now, but that's like one of the main reasons I I believe. Okay, so yeah, again, everybody in Germany are usually very aware of the past, taking it very serious, way more serious than everybody would think, I believe. Now that I live abroad, I see lots of people making jokes of that. And if I'm close with someone, like with my close friends, I have like some close friends. For example, one of my friends here from my sports team is from Indonesia, and he's also very well read, so he knows the lots of history too, which is not very common here in Southeast Asia, by the way. But he's very well read about it. So when he jokes about it, I can see, okay, that's just a joke, and then I joke about it, and then it's fine. But I would never make this joke in public, right? You can only joke with people who know that it's a joke and who actually know how bad it has been back then. All right. Yeah, this is the thing I'm going to finish off with now is that I'm very surprised that once I moved abroad, it's not only here in Southeast Asia. I lived in different countries in Europe. I lived in Australia, and now I live in Southeast Asia. I've seen this everywhere. The education about this topic. Of course, I mean I can't compare it with Germany. Of course, Germany should have the best education when it comes to the Second World War because we started it, so we should know what happened, of course. However, like the ignorance in other countries about what happened back then is sometimes a bit puzzling. Like here in Southeast Asia, but again, happened in Australia too, happened everywhere. They just like there are lots of people walking around with like Hitler T-shirts just because he's kind of famous, and I say famous in like quotation marks. They're like, yeah, Hitler was a famous guy, cool. They have the Nazi sign, and not the Buddhist swastika, but they have the Nazi flag on T-shirts. They have the Nazi flag in like shop logos, like in local shops and so on. So it's ridiculous. And this like a big pop band, like one member of a pop band had like I think 2 or 3 years ago she had the Nazi flag on a T-shirt or something. And you're like, what the hell? And she's like, yeah, Hitler is such an inspiration because he moved the whole country. What? So it's a bit, that's still like in 2022, it's like maybe it's a good sign so that people move on. But I mean, clearly you shouldn't forget it. Like this should never be forgotten. And that's why like a saying in Germany, like when those days of like remembrance are, like the Holocaust Memorial Day, it's like a slogan everybody shares, it's like never again. This can happen, never again. And Germans are very aware of this, and this never again is like ingrained in I think in most of our brains. So when we then see a party like the AfD, like the far-right party gaining traction, you're like, oh no, we have to do something against that. Never again is this going to happen. And this is something that's just, I think, in the mind of every German person. All right, so I could talk on like forever, but I think I'm going to stop it right here, so don't make it too heavy. It's almost 20 minutes that I talk about this. But yeah, so just to let you know like why this is such an important topic still for Germans in Germany, so why you can't just joke around in public and show those signs and so on and say those words just because, well, of the history. History matters, and it should never be forgotten because, well, it should never happen again. All right, this was a bit more of a somber episode of Servus Crowd, but I think it just had to be done. It's kind of important. It's also close to my heart. So, yeah, guys, if you also want more history lessons here from Germany, let me know. Other than that, I appreciate you joining in again. I try to have the next episode a little bit less somber. But again, I thought this time it was just important to talk about this. I hope you're all safe. If you can, subscribe to this podcast, like it, share it, rate it, because this will help that other people find it. And then we can have like bigger, broader discussions. Until then, as always, stay safe, take care, and I'll talk to you soon. Servus.